Welcome to Best Practices Weekly for primary teachers. Today we'll look at an article that will help us know what to do when we're working with struggling readers in primary grades. This edition of Best Practices Weekly for primary teachers is going to be a little bit different. We're going to look closely at an article called What Really Matters When Working with Struggling Readers. And because there are so many best practices in here for us to take back to our classrooms, we're actually going to do this in two parts. So this is part one of this edition. Next week we'll release part two. This article comes from the April 2013 edition of The Reading Teacher. I want you to reflect for a minute about a reader that you have taught in the past that was struggling with learning how to read. Whenever I'm working with a student like that, a lot of times I'm questioning myself about, am I doing this right? Am I doing these interventions right? Today we'll look closely at what the research says really works, and we'll focus in today on specifically what the research shows and what schools are doing for decoding. A University of Tennessee professor by the name of Richard Allington wrote this article, and one thing he shared in his introduction I have to tell you. He said that when he was in college, he had a professor tell him that it took 50 years for current research to reach instructional practice in classrooms. And he felt like that was a pessimistic view of current education, but he says over time he's learned that that is true, and he teaches his students that same thing today. So for me then the question is, if research isn't influencing classroom practice, what is? And Allington thinks that it is entrepreneurs and companies who come in and tout a buy our stuff package curriculum that says that it's scientific and research based, but that a lot of times that's not the case. I thought the best way for us to look at the best practices from this article was to do it in the light of a do this, not that. So the topic we're going to really focus in on today is decoding. Allington said the thing to do in decoding is to make sure that you're using decoding instruction as a small part of every reading lesson if you are a kindergarten or first grade teacher. He says that teaching decoding beyond first grade really hasn't been proven to have significant effects on struggling readers, that usually when those readers get to second grade and beyond, they need other strategies for learning to read, and decoding just isn't effective anymore. What the author cautions us about is placing an overemphasis on phonics instruction on letter sound alone. We need to make sure that we're tying letter sounds to words and to reading, because the purpose of learning letter sounds is to read and make meaning out of print. So be careful when teaching phonics in isolation. Next up on our do this, not that list is decodable text. But before we get to the do's and don'ts of decodable text, let's just define that so we're all working with a common definition. In this instance, decodable text would be some type of a trade book put out by a publishing company that only has words in it that would be easy for students to sound out or decode. Sometimes nonsense words are used in decodable text to get students practicing what it feels like to sound words out. The research shows that actually using decodable text and having students decode nonsense words really does not have a long-term effect on struggling readers. Instead, it would be better for teachers to develop a variety of strategies to teach decoding or figuring out what unknown words mean, and realize that that's not a one-size-fit-all instruction. You need a variety of strategies to reach multiple learners. In 2011, Cunningham wrote, "Children do need systematic phonics instruction, but there is no one best way to teach phonics." And last on our do this, not that list, we'll look at phonics and inventive writing versus worksheets. Let's do the don'ts first. Teachers should not use worksheets and think that they are going to teach phonics skills, especially if it's phonics in isolation, things that are not tied to meaning or reading. Instead, we should encourage children to use inventive writing and spelling, because that's really when students connect with letter sounds, is when they're using it for a purpose. So using writing and inventive spelling actually promotes an understanding of letter sound relationship that really no other method of teaching can do. Children need to be interested in using letter sounds for a good cause before they make connections to what the purpose of letter sounds are. So for me, I think primary teachers would find that best practice exciting. We can give our copy machines a break with the phonics worksheets and have students actually writing in journals and notebooks. So let's summarize and reflect a little bit on what we learned about decoding today. I think we've learned that a lot of times our practices don't align to what the research shows is really effective with struggling readers. And I think a lot of times it's because we're never forced to go out and look for it. We're handed curriculum packages that have intervention strategies in them and decodable text in them for struggling students. They have phonics programs already built in. But I love the do this, not that list that we learned from Allington. That a lot of the things that we can do, we can start doing tomorrow. It doesn't take a program. It just takes us changing some of our instructional strategies. And if we take some of the things out of our instruction that are proven not to be effective and have long-term effects, then that frees us up more for some of the things that we should be doing instead. I don't know if you could tell or not, but I was pretty excited about this article and the do this, not that list. And I can't wait to try these best practices with struggling readers in my school. Now make sure you join us next week because we'll talk about important things like what kind of books should be in front of struggling readers, whether it's appropriate for struggling readers to do independent reading at school, and what types of programs might really help struggling readers. I can't wait to hear from you and how you're using these best practices in your primary classroom. Thanks for joining us today.